Hi, and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to welcome Thomas Logan today. Thomas is the founder of Equal Entry. Uh, really glad to have you with us, Thomas. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to work in the field and what it is you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, I started in accessibility in university, actually. So I did a computer science degree and didn't really know what I wanted to do with that degree. And my senior year, I had a project with a student who was blind in the classics department. And so his challenge was ancient world maps are just these static images. And the idea was, how could he do his PhD research or his thesis research on this inaccessible map? And so that was my first touch into accessibility, was just realizing how you can take any information that's been digitized and make it available, in other means. And so that was definitely what ignited just that interest in me, was seeing like firsthand making something possible with technology that wasn't possible before.
Fantastic. And tactile maps are a really interesting thing in their own right, and people have multiple different approaches from digital tactile maps to physical ones that that are made out of cast metal and all things in between. But so how did you transition from doing that, the map making and so on, into a career in accessibility? Did you immediately think, gosh, you know what, I'm going to set up my own consultancy, accessibility is the way for me? Or was it just a case of, well, this is interesting, I'm going to see what's out there? So how did the career progress and you end up running your own organization?
Sure. Well, really connecting back to that first project, that ended up doing very well from just advertising sort of the idea of being able to do that. It wasn't, it was an undergraduate project, so it was really showing what was possible, and Microsoft ended up funding that project. And so I had basically a direct first job out of school was working at Microsoft during Windows Vista on their Microsoft UI automation framework. And so that's been interesting for me to see that that's actually something being used now, like 10 years later from the time that I was. The technology moves fast, but it also, takes a while to actually get these accessibility standards implemented. After Windows Vista and working at Microsoft, I pretty much have always been a consultant in some degree, like for part of my work. I'm just naturally attracted to, short-term problems that basically challenge me to think creatively. So I've basically always been in consulting since Microsoft. And it's really been across, all these different industries. And in the end, it just became, well, why not just do it myself? After learning all the experience of being a consultant, basically was motivated to just set it up myself, continue using my knowledge and basically my passion of making stuff more accessible.
Okay, and that's probably the last time Vista will ever get mentioned with any kind of positivity.
Right.
But yeah, UI automation is a really important part of how the underlying accessibility works for most people's desktop experience now. So that's great to know that you had a part in it. Deborah, I know you had a question.
Yes, and you made me smile, Thomas, when you were talking about, I just started my own business. It was very interesting starting my own business. I was in the banking industry for many, many years. I'll show my age. Speaking of my age, I just heard that I have been identified as one of the top social media influencers over the age of 50. And the guy said, "You are over 50." And I'm like, yeah, I'm over 50. So anyway, but back to starting my own business. But it is a very interesting thing, because I know you've been around in the industry and have actually worked with a lot of the major players in the industry. And I had heard about you as my company was merged with SSB Bart Group. And after I left and started Rue Global Communications, I started hearing about this brilliant guy named Thomas Logan. And he's such a great trainer and he's so amazing. And I thought, really? because I don't think there's enough great trainers in our industry. And so it was funny how we reconnected, and I've actually worked with you through my company, and also have sent some of my other customers to you, and they love you. They love you. And so one reason why I really wanted to have you on the show, not only do we like to represent who are the leaders out here in accessibility, that's very important to Antonio, Neil, and myself, but one thing that intrigues me, besides I'm a fan of yours, I think you're really brilliant at what you're doing, and I like your team, but what you're doing with training. So I was wondering, and I just last week was at a strategy meeting for IAAP, International Accessibility Association of Accessibility Professionals, and we're talking about, as an industry, how do we really help others join the accessibility profession? How do we know that the accessibility professional, when they're, say, hitting someone like Neil, which is sort of unfair because Neil's such a genius with this, but they go and they say, oh, Neil, I'm such a genius, you've got to hire me. How does Neil, the Neils of the world, know who they're getting? And to me, a big part of that is training. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit, because we have talked about this, about how you do training and how you're thinking of it. And I'm going to cue you up. I love what you're doing with those video vignettes and accessibility. So go.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, there are lots of different things related to training. I guess, from even starting at the Microsoft UI automation job, the idea was always, all right, get people to use this, people have to implement this to make their application accessible. And, probably the realization I've had, or that I feel like I focus on, is making sure that the information in the training is expressed with multimedia, and actually demonstrating both the assistive technology and the application. So I think what is missing a lot of times is just only seeing one side of the implementation. Either here's what the developer needs to do, or here's what it sounds like when someone is using the assistive technology. And so I definitely like showing everything end to end, working together. And that's something that, I think that's still a challenge for people as they continue to build their applications, is that you can read a specification and see something is required and see that. But if it's not in a end-to-end sort of, oh, I can relate to that application, or I've used that application, seeing how it actually works, I think, is invaluable to understanding how to basically either emulate that or, do something better than what was already done before.
I agree. And making multimedia fully accessible, I know that's, but will you tell our audience just a little bit about this video library, fully accessible multimedia? And I believe you told me they're very short. I forget how many minutes you said they were, but would you just talk about that a little? 'Cause I think that's brilliant. You can take them almost as objects. I'm a former programmer, and you can take it and customize a class. I just thought it was very clever. Right. And then I know Antonio has a question, so sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, that concept or that idea is looking at, okay, let's not make a video training that's 30 minutes long or 60 minutes long that someone has to skip through to get just to the section that they want. Ideally, with building an accessible transcript and having audio descriptions, it's that old adage that accessibility is always useful for more than, one thing. And so I found that by having very short videos, those can be combined or mixed together into longer format videos. So for example, if someone needed to know how to use non-visual desktop access, a specific screen reader, you could take these very short videos that have maybe been done, for here's how you read headings, here's how you read images, and combine those into a full training just on NVDA, for example. So by making them piecemeal or chunkable, you can combine them or reuse them in more than one way. And certainly some people, it's that some people never want to watch a video. They only want to read text and, view images. And so again, I think that's part of, by embracing the accessibility standards and how we build our content, we enable people to consume the content in multiple ways. So not everyone wants to watch a video. Not everyone wants to read a document. So you make it accessible and available in those formats. People can get it how they need it.
Well done. Antonio?
Well, Thomas, you were explaining us the way how you started on accessibility. You were at university and you ended up working with a blind student, helping him to read maps. Was that a common thing? You know, somebody at the working decided to move and to work within accessibility. Was more colleagues of yours doing a similar work? And if there was any, you know, if you remember from the teachers supporting you at the time, was that a common path for someone to follow?
Yeah, good question. I mean, not at all at that time. And so I was just so fortunate that Dr. Bishop, that basically was how I got connected to accessibility. He really was pioneering the use of Python. The Python coding library was just coming out right then. And so it was a really good combination of a professor that had helped us with all of the tools that we needed to get something going quickly. I can say that when I interviewed at Microsoft, there wasn't a position in the accessibility group, but it was kind of a real, you know, declare it. And a learning lesson for me was that I really, when I did the interview, I said, this is the area I want to work in. I think it was kind of new for Microsoft at that time to have someone from college coming in saying, this is what I want to work in, you know, but I think it was great. They ended up making the position, making that available to me. And, you know, so from that point on, I was really like, well, that's the area I want to focus on. I mean, I can say over the history of my career, it's been a lot of frustrations and like getting things to be more accessible. And in the last few years, I've been super excited with web and all the work from the W3C. I'm seeing like a lot more accessible software, you know, and it's rewarding. And so for new people coming up in the field, it is really different from when I think about when I started at Microsoft. There wasn't a lot of resources to refer to, and I was making decisions on like a API for accessibility. And I think that's something now that, you know, ideally from taking and collating the learning, we can take best practices from old technologies and basically still leverage them in new technologies, not making everyone start from scratch.
Just picking up there, today there was some stats revealed by a social media analytics solution, and they were referring that 80% of the videos that people watch online, they watch it without sound.
Mm-hmm.
So how many, you know, companies are missing opportunities of engagement with their consumers just because they are not using captions? What do you think it will be necessary to make caption videos more available, even from a consumer side? So I want to post a video. I won't be able to do it myself just using Twitter. So I think that, you know, bringing the ability of everybody to be able to caption a video, it will be something interesting to explore, but it's not widely available because basically only an expert can do it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's exciting what's available just from the YouTube player itself. I mean, you can get at least a starting point for a transcript and a caption that's actually pretty good. You know, I mean, it needs editing and cleaning up, but it is something that, again, before that, you're having to run like Dragon Naturally Speaking or run something much more technical to try and generate captions. Now there is, you know, a workflow where anyone could go through YouTube and freely get at least the beginning of a automatic translation. For me with video and maybe even thinking more like medium professionals or people that work in training, I think a lot of times people already have the information they need for audio descriptions and captions in their workflow. Like they're producing scripts or they're producing other assets when they're making their videos, that if they just knew the accessibility component at the beginning, they could just work that into the workflow. It's almost no extra work if you know that up front, you know? And so I think that's something that still has work to be done in training is, well, let's talk to people that make a lot of videos, understand their content production workflow and show them how it's really not much extra work. You know, I think that's the hurdle, is getting people to see it as like something that can just be integrated into their workflow and not be a large cost or time consuming.
You know, one thing, as you and Antonio were talking, Thomas, and I think it's fresh on my mind, just getting back from the IAAP strategy session with G3ICT, but how can we do a better job? And I know this is something Neil and Antonio and I talk about all the time, but how do we do a better job of welcoming new people into the accessibility field? Technologists like yourself that are like, going down one path and then you run into this amazing person and your whole life has changed.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can partially do it with training, but we're doing it with things like AXSchat. I know that our field is not, our industry is not considered very welcoming. And I remember one time Greg Vanderheiden had said, we have to stop eating our young. We really have to be more welcoming to people of all ages joining our industry. It's not just younger people, because a technologist I'm a technologist, and they might say, I never thought that. That's a really good point. But what ideas do you have, especially with some of your innovative training, about getting more designers and content and IT people to join our community?
Well, one thing that I do in New York City, I'm the co-organizer of a meetup group, Accessibility New York City. And so I do that with two other folks, Sean Laureate and Cameron Kundiff. And that's been a great opportunity just to bring people together and share best practices. I mean, we have all types of people in our meetup group. And I think what's been great about our meetup group, we leverage the learning that I've had with Equal Entry to make our meetings be as successful as we can. So we live stream all of our meetups, and we have real-time text translation at our meetup. So we always have captions, right when it's done. And that's been a good use of, like, everything we do gets recorded and it's available for people to use in the future, freely available. So I think that's definitely one way of doing it, is just like every time you have a community gathering or people took the time to make a good accessibility presentation, getting it filmed, getting it out there, getting it available for people to find and learn from, I think is very important. There's a lot of good answers out there, but the internet's a complicated place to find the right answer and find the right solution. So I think that's also something that working together across companies and across countries in different working groups, either like the W3C or like even a Slack channel that's now become more popular. There's really different ways for people to, like, for example, with the Slack channel, just join the channel, ask a question, and there's, developers from all over the world that have a high level of accessibility experience that are just communicating back and having discussions in that channel. And that's like something I couldn't have imagined, 5 or 6 years ago, being that easy and frictionless to share information.
I'm going to turn it over to Neil because he probably has a question. But before I do, will you make sure that you give us the link to the accessibility meetup?
Yep.
And also to that Slack channel, and we will include that on AXSchat.com underneath your bio, in your bio, so that we make sure that anybody that's interested in that. I had not heard about the Slack channel, for example, so I'm excited about that. I also think that what's powerful as you're doing the accessibility meetup, and that was something else we were talking about, some of these hackathons and these AXSchat, meetups that are happening all over the world. We bring all of those communities more together. That's one thing we're trying to give a voice at AXSchat. I know others are trying to do it as well, but go ahead. Anthony.
I'm going to be in one of those hackathons in Dublin in the end of November, called AXSchat. So it's going to happen for 3 days. So they're trying to find ways to engage with the Dublin City Council, trying to engage with the local developer community to bring the accessibility, at least to have the conversation and to talk about it. So it's accessdublin.com. So you should be able to find some interesting stuff there.
Oh, great.
And are you spelling access, ACCESS, not the way we spell access? So it's hack access Dublin?
Yes, if you write access Dublin, you will be able to find it straight away.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So Thomas, now I can get a word in edgeways. I'm not usually this shy or retiring. So I'm going back to the idea of vignettes and video vignettes. I think this is really interesting because actually one of the things that we see, and we spend an awful lot of time immersed in social media, is that people have minute attention spans, especially if you're dyslexic like me or have ADHD like Deborah. Whilst we can get hyper focus, but a lot of the time we're flitting from one thing to the next. So I think it's really interesting. Are you putting some of these vignettes up in public, or are these things that you're sharing with customers only?
A bit of both. Like I would say, like the majority of the trainings that we've made in the last year have been for SSB BART group and for the university. There's been a lot of like short videos that we've made with that group shared out on the YouTube channel. And they definitely, the ones that I actually like the most are the ones that we did with SSB BART group, where we were featuring different employees with disabilities and going through, you know, just very specific cases of accessibility knowledge. Those all came out. We worked with different people for all of the videos, and they came out in a really great, short and sweet. With the vignette approach, that's something though going forward, what I'm pursuing or investigating is just different ways to link those short videos into either like automated checks or scanning checks, because I think that's the point too. You only need this information right when you need it. For people that aren't making a living or really needing to be experts in accessibility, often they just need to know exactly what to do at the moment that they're, you know, dealing with the content.
Sure.
So that's something I'm interested in. I'm currently just discussing that with various potential partners, but I think that's a good way of, you know, making better use of the videos too, is just only pop it up right when someone needs it. You know, oh, how do I do table of contents in Word and make sure that it's accessible, or data table in Word? You just need it right when you're making it.
You're not going to be the accessibility clippy, are you?
No, I hope not.
No.
It'll be a cool clippy. It'll be.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just riffing on the theme of unpopular Microsoft products here, which is a bit unfair because I'm actually a big fan of Microsoft. So great to hear that you're going to be doing that. And I think the other thing that I think about a lot is user-generated content and how that is exploding. And Antonio's touched on it as well. How do we enable people to do this stuff more? I still struggle because I think people are, don't know. Companies that do have the accessibility tools hide them in the options. So for example, if you want to do image descriptions in Twitter, you have to turn them on.
Right.
And yet, if you were to actually look at it with it turned on, it's hardly what I would call an intrusive bit of the user interface. So I'm just going to try and do a live demonstration here. This will obviously fail, but what you have is this tiny little thing here which just says add description. Now that's not intrusive to anyone because you've already got the thing with the smiley face and a thing that edits to allow a tag. So why not, Twitter, if you're listening, hopefully, turn it on by default? Because we can't, as accessibility professionals, cope with the load that is being generated by people out there. So we need to be encouraging people to engage. So how else do you think we can engage people? I know you're running the stuff in you know, the meetups and so on, but not everyone's lucky enough to live in New York or to be around for, you know, Boston or London or wherever the main geographical meetups are. So how else do you think we can, in this world of sort of virtual meetups, encourage people to do more?
Well, this might be a slight tangent, but I think is related. I think one of the biggest barriers for developers that are needing to learn how to do the right thing is just looking at the software developer kits for every new sort of framework or library. I've done these exercises in some of the trainings I've made in the past of just taking, like, say, an Android SDK sample and then adding in the work that needs to be done to make it accessible. And I always think that could be a really logical place just to be putting accessibility focus is, you know, a bigger investment on the actual kit that gets published by the, you know, the person that developed the framework, that they actually put, you know, accessibility best practices into the things that everyone cuts and pastes and starts from. So I think that's starting to change, but that would still be something big to me to keep seeing more of, is like more robust documentation in the software developer kit of like, here's actually how you do it with this framework.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You know, people talk about build. You know, a lot of people are not coding their own stuff; they're building it from component libraries, and so if the component libraries aren't accessible from the get-go, then all of the products that are the end result of those component libraries won't be accessible either. So really, the basic building blocks aren't there. So yeah, get it into the building blocks is really important.
And then, I mean, the scenario you're saying about like the Twitter one, I mean, I have the exact same frustration. You know, for me, it's like, well, I would like a user setting or a prompt. Like I would actually desire that, because in my workflow, I'm like, I always want to basically put that description in. And so it is something where, you know, just changing the design subtly, or at least having that option available in all of these authoring platforms, it's such a huge difference to, you know, change up the workflow and sort of lead people to adding these descriptions, you know, in different ways. I definitely think there's more that can be done. I was happy to see Twitter added that, you know, because for me, it's like getting a way to make my tweet image accessible was the first piece. But yeah, now it's like, well, how do we make that easier and not something that's hidden in a setting, or, you know, that you have to read more documentation to learn how to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was at a conference in April, and a lot of people were getting very excited and coming up to me and asking me, how do you set it? How do you set it? Because it's an accessibility conference and everyone's busy taking pictures of slides and then having a moral dilemma about how they can post the pictures of slides on Twitter because they're pictures of text. It's like, yes, you can. And here's how, when you drill down into the options. So yeah, absolutely, I'm with you. Let's put those prompts out. WordPress is pretty good as an example, because it prompts you when you're uploading images to WordPress. You've got the accessibility data clearly laid out as an empty field that you should be filling. And maybe, you know, it should be questioning you if you press submit if you haven't filled in the field. Maybe it should be a mandatory field.
I mean, it certainly should be mandatory. Like, if you're in, like, say, like a government agency, or you're in somewhere where you know you want to be doing it, anything that can put it in the workflow, you know, directly will be so much better.
Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. Go on, Antonio. I see you have a question. You're on mute.
No, I was not going to ask a question, but you mentioned, so I can take the chance. So today, we see so many new things coming to market. We see Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality. I know people excited about it, sometimes over engineering stuff, and here around me, there's always a meetup about IoT every month. I think people just choose because it's a hot topic and probably attracts someone. Sometimes the discussion is not particularly great, but it just attracts people to go to a place and network. So how do you see accessibility coming into these areas where, especially because everybody is still trying to explore them and figure out how they are going to work?
So just basically having more general pollination of accessibility into other meetups. So,
I think,
And how do you see accessibility into internet, into IoT, and to virtual reality?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, I guess with just straight technology, I mean, another point for me is like, all of the concepts that have existed in accessibility APIs haven't changed since when I pretty much started working on the UI automation API. So I do think even like looking at virtual reality or thinking about an API that's exposing information, I would definitely start from, well, what actually currently works with the current APIs and how are they designed? I think that with any type of software thing, that would be a good starting point. I really wish all the names of like attributes were the same. Like it drives me crazy that it's called alt text on an image. It's called content description on Android. It's called accessible label on iOS. They're all the same things, but if you don't know that or haven't been trained in that, you have to think on each platform, how do I do this? So with virtual reality, you know, like I think about the Unity editor. If there was like these little properties for the objects you're setting in virtual reality, like accessible name, role, I mean, there's really no reason not to just like start from that point and then look at the screen reader or look at the screen magnifier, start trying those things. So that's definitely an interest of mine with virtual reality. With Internet of Things, it's been interesting for me just seeing like kiosks and other sort of, you know, built devices that are getting put out into the world. I guess it's sort of like the Internet of Things, thinking more about some of the accessibility requirements that I used to not have to think about. So like accessibility to someone that's using a wheelchair or someone with a certain amount of reach. Those were things that didn't have to think about as much when we're working with websites and web applications, but Internet of Things and the built world and interacting with these devices, it's really just like more things to think about or more things to understand and learn. And I guess as technology evolves, the people that get trained, they need to learn, you know, both hardware and software kind of things to think about for accessibility.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're pretty much at the end of our half hour, so it's been a really interesting chat. Fascinating to hear what you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to you joining us tomorrow night on Twitter.
Yes.
It'll be fast and furious.
I'll be putting my accessible descriptions in the images, I promise.
Yeah.
I have to now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. One of the platforms that we use for the chat actually still doesn't have it. So I use TweetDeck, and although Twitter has enabled the API for accessibility, they haven't actually enabled you to put image descriptions in TweetDeck yet, which is kind of irritating because TweetDeck is one of the ways that you can handle, you know, fast chats.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm going to stop bashing Twitter because they're actually my favorite people, because I love Twitter. We all love Twitter, so we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Twitter. So thank you very much, Thomas. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Good job, Thomas.
All right. See y'all tomorrow.